Artillery fire and missile strikes have gone on in Ukraine for about half a year now.
Is not well trained. It is not well equipped. Its logistics suck. They can't fight outside of rail systems because that's how they transport all of their material. And that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are doing so.
But recent news has been filled with positive headlines for the Ukrainians, as they launch successful counterattacks and take back some Ukrainian territories. In this video, geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan talks about the barriers that the Russian army is facing in Ukraine and other problems that have affected its war efforts. We've recently done a video on Peter Zeihan and his analysis on a possible political crisis in Russia, but today, he'll look more on the military aspect in the war in Ukraine. Thanks for your continued support of our channel. Let's dive right into the video.
The Russian collapse on every point of contact has been so extreme and so total that it's very difficult for even people who follow this issue full time to keep track of what's going on. The very, very short version is that over the course of the last couple of weeks, couple of months really, the Ukrainians have advertised that they're going to launch a major invasion counterattack in the Kherson region in an attempt to reclaim that territory, and we're going to include a link here as to what they were thinking with that. But instead, the bulk of Ukrainian forces seem to have somehow snuck all the way across Ukraine and sucker punched the Russians. The Russians did deploy maybe 10% of their troops from their eastern front to the Kherson region in an attempt to resupply because they knew that's where the attack was going to be, and as a result they were unprepared for the Ukrainian assault. The Ukrainians so far have basically destroyed all functional Russian military formations in the Kharkiv province in the country's east, and they are now in the process of doing some mopping up and moving into Luhansk and Donetsk, which were those two provinces that the Russians invaded back in 2014 and declared to be independent republics. The government of Luhansk seems to have dissolved, and the military of the Luhansk Republic, which is the legal fiction that the Russians created to justify the current invasion, seems to have dissolved as well. The Russians are not retreating. This is not moving your tanks in orderly formations to get to a more defensible border. The military has crumpled. Izium, which was the location that the Russians spent the last 2 months trying to seize and ultimately did, and has been the forward military base for most of their operations in eastern Ukraine, has been captured by the Ukrainians, and not just captured intact. The Russians did not even get on trucks to try to drive away because the Ukrainians were using drones to hit trucks on the highway. They simply left their equipment and ran, and it appears in most cases the only reason that the Ukrainian assault is not happening more quickly is that they are waiting for Russians on foot to run to the next town, tell everyone that the Ukrainians are coming, so that those troops can get off their equipment and run. So we're not just seeing a broad-scale collapse of the entire Russian military position in these areas, we are seeing them abandoning every piece of equipment that they have brought in and stored up for the last 6 months as part of their effort to go onto the rest of Ukraine. So in the case of Izium specifically, that is enough tanks, artillery, ammo, and fuel to supply 10 to 20,000 men, making it the single biggest arms transfer we have seen since World War II in the days of Lend-Lease. It's just that it's from the Russians to the Ukrainians. That one day has transferred more weapons to the Ukrainian military than everything that NATO has done to this point.
In this first clip, Peter Zeihan notes several shortcomings in Russia's armed forces, which have hindered their invasion of Ukraine. Some of these include inaccurate intel, poor logistics, poor training, and the loss of equipment to Ukraine's armed forces. Peter dives deeper into how Ukrainian forces have regained some territories in the Kharkiv region, where they initiated a lightning-fast counterattack that caught the Russians off guard. Peter Zeihan also clarifies that the Russians are not falling back and regrouping towards their border. Instead, they are fleeing and leaving thousands of equipment, vehicles, and ammunition behind to the Ukrainians. This all sounds too familiar, as the same thing happened when the US forces scrambled out of Afghanistan, leaving millions of dollars worth of equipment to the Taliban. With Russia losing so much equipment and suffering overwhelming casualties, people are now wondering if they are even capable of defeating Ukraine. In this next clip, Peter Zeihan talks about issues within Russian borders that could affect its invasion of Ukraine.
For those of you who have been cheering for the Ukrainians, I don't want you to get overly excited here. We have seen this before. The Russian military is not well trained. It is not well equipped. Its logistics suck. They can't fight outside of rail systems because that's how they transport all of their material. And that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are doing so well here, is that they've taken out some of the rail depots or captured them, and leaving the Russians to know that they've been completely cut off from resupply and reinforcements. However, Russia has won about half of the wars that it has fought. And in every single one of the wars that it has fought, that it has won, there have been moments like what is going on right now. Because what happens is the Russians move in, they get sucker punched superior forces in terms of either number or more likely technology and logistics and morale and training, destroy them, the Russian position collapses, the Russians retreat, or more likely that military division is simply obliterated, and then back in Mother Russia, there is a bit of a regeneration and a new force comes in with different tactics and different leadership and better equipment, and then the numbers turn. Remember that the Russians still, at least on paper, have a military force that's over 10 times the size of Ukraine. They've got more tanks, they've got more artillery, they've got more aircraft. Everything on paper suggests that this is still the Russians' war to lose. So yeah, they've had a really crappy week, and a lot of us are cheering that this continues, but we should not bet on that. The question is, how fast can the Russian system adjust? And there's really no way to judge that, because the Putin government has such a tight information lockdown in Russia proper, we really can't even gauge that. The second question that in the long run is going to be far more important is whether or not this is the end. The Russian demographic is so far beyond terminal that I've long thought that this was going to be their last war. Now, they still have the numerical advantage over Ukraine, which is even in a worse demographic situation. So in a fight between two maimed countries, Russia still has all the cards. But we now know, from the way this war has been carried out, that the Russian military equipment manufacturing capacity is nil. Most of that money's been stolen. We know that Russia's in-place capacity to train new troops is nil. We know that that has all been stolen. And we know that they're now relying on imported weapons from places like Iran and North Korea, which are not synonymous with scale and quality. And so if this is the situation the Russians are in, where their population's dying out, their youth generation is their last one, and they might not even be able to equip or train anyone they get, this could very well be the end. Do not count your chickens before they hatch, because Ukraine is in exactly the same situation. And if something happens to the weapons pipeline from the West, there's only so much equipment that the Ukrainians can capture from the Russians before it's all back in Russia proper.
In this clip, Peter Zeihan says that although things are looking good for the Ukrainians, it is not yet time to celebrate. Peter says that all these problems in the Russian military have happened before in previous wars fought by Russia. Realistically, Russia is still bound to win this war, but we will see what happens once they bring in new troops and equipment. According to Peter, corruption has also found its way in the production of Russian weapons and training for its soldiers, which is why Russia is turning to foreign countries such as North Korea for its weapons. However, North Korean weapons have frequently been dubbed as unreliable and outdated. The same can be said for Ukraine, as most of its weapons are coming from the West, and if this supply were to be disturbed, it would be a major problem for the Ukrainian armed forces.
That's where we are. This is not just a normal fog of war. This is fog of war when most of the assumptions that we were all operating on have proven to be wrong. I was probably the most optimistic for the Ukrainians at the beginning of this. They had 8 years to prepare. They have a sense of nationality that did not exist a decade ago. And even I thought that this would be over with a complete Russian victory throughout all of Ukraine within 6 months. Clearly, that is not how this is going right now. But it's too late to count the Russians out. All the numbers are still on their side. And if they are able to rally like they did in World War II, we will go from a complete rout across the Eastern Front to something like the Great Patriotic War. That is still well within the realm of possibility. But the capacity of Russia to be an extra-regional power, that is now over for sure. We have seen the Russians be forced to repatriate equipment from a number of their operations around the world, whether it be in the African continent, where the Wagner Group's been active, to Syria, where it's a lot of air defense, to even places closer to home like Georgian-occupied territories in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The Russian equipment situation is now so desperate that they're pulling it all back. So in the best case scenario for the Russians, where they can still turn this around, you are still talking about a completely castrated military strategic position on a global scale that reduces Russian power to the Russian Federation proper and wherever they can impose direct military control moving forward, which may or may not be Ukraine. So even in a situation where the Russians can turn this around completely, it is an end to Russia as a strategic power. That we can say with high confidence now. You throw in some of the stuff that's happening on the economic front, that's a topic for another day, and that castrates the Russian power capacity even further. Okay, I realize that's a little rambling, but honestly, we've been getting one shock after another, hour after an hour for 96 hours now. I don't know how far the Ukrainians can push this. They do have limitations on manpower and logistics, just like the Russians. But I certainly understand their desire to hit while the iron is hot, because we have an in-progress, rolling and accelerating rout. And that is a once-in-a-war opportunity. They're doing their best to take full advantage of it.
According to Peter, he himself thought that this war would be a clean sweep for Russia. But this does not align with the reality of the situation today. Ukrainians are putting up a noble fight, pushing the Russians out of their territories. However, Peter says that the statistics are still on the Russian side. Ukraine has the momentum, and if they are able to defeat Russia, this embarrassing loss would strip Russia of its title as a strategic superpower. In this video, Peter Zeihan analyzes Ukraine's recent small victories with its counterattacks in the Kharkiv region. He also discusses several potholes in Russia's military, with some being logistics, low morale, and just overall poor performance by its armed forces. The world stands with Ukraine in this war, and despite continued support from Western countries, Russia still possesses favorable statistics for winning this war. What did you think of Peter Zeihan's analysis on the recent events going on in Ukraine? Do you think Russia is capable of winning this war? Give us your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.